Hi, this is Patrick. Before we get started today, I just want to let you know about my new book, The 5-Week Leadership Challenge, 35 Action Steps to Become the Leader You Were Meant to Be. It launched August 24th, and it's available everywhere. You can buy it online, you can buy it in stores, but I encourage you, buy it, read it, invest in yourself. Over the course of 35 days, you'll work your way through a journey of learning to help you to become a more effective leader. You can learn more about the book and everything we have to offer associated with it at 5weekleadershipchallenge.com. It's the number 5weekleadershipchallenge.com. Now let's take a sneak peek at today's episode.
What if I take all of my understanding of brand strategy, design, external communication, and I bring that to the internal and I say, how can I help you develop your internal brand? The way employees talk about you when they go to that barbecue, the way bosses talk about you as employees, the way you talk about your boss, the way you talk about the team, the way you talk about the organization. How can I shape that perception? How can I create healthy teams, healthy cultures inside companies? Therefore, there's more alignment, healthier relationships, better communication, better execution.
Hello and welcome to the Leadership Lab podcast. My name is Patrick and I'm your host in the Leadership Lab. This podcast is for leaders. Whether you're leading your career, a team, or an entire organization, you are a leader and this podcast is for you. I truly believe we can learn lessons about leadership from a wide range of sources, and it's with this in mind that I invite guests to join me in the Leadership Lab. Today, I'm joined in the Leadership Lab by Scott Waldron. Scott Waldron has learned the importance of brand and the impact getting a brand right has on you as an individual, for your company, or a culture inside the workplace. He says everything is built around your brand, like the engine inside of a car. Without the engine, the car goes nowhere and lacks a soul. Your brand is your soul, that thing that gives you substance. You're going to want to grab something to write with, sit back, prepare to take some notes as Scott Waldron and I get together in the Leadership Lab to talk about brand and how you can tap into your brand to more effectively accomplish your work and have a better impact in your life. Scott Waldron, thanks so much for joining me today in the Leadership Lab.
I am excited, and especially because of the name of this thing. It's like, I feel like I'm going to get examined in some way, shape, or form by being in some type of laboratory here. So
that's the idea, right? I teach at the university. I always think like, what's going on in all these different labs around here? And labs are all about like testing things and trying to figure things out. And I don't know about you, but my leadership story is a lot of testing things and trying to figure things out and learning from other people and science. Sometimes learning some things that I didn't completely expect would come at all. And that's kind of the fun of it.
You know what? Life's a laboratory, right?
Exactly. Hey, Scott, so I was getting ready for this podcast. I went all over your website. People need to check it out. I'll put the link in the notes. But as I was going through, of course, I was naturally thinking, okay, Scott, S-K-O-T, maybe Scandinavian. Then I hit your About Me part and it said, I'm not Scandinavian. So now I kept reading a little bit deeper into it. I think names are really important. So I'm just curious, Scott, S-K-O-T, how'd you land on that?
Okay, you ready? This is super deep.
Bring it on.
Okay, all right. So, elementary school, I'm in the same class with Scott Woodruff and Scott Wilson 3 years in a row, right? Couldn't even put my last name. I had to put my last name on everything. I couldn't just have my first name on there. It was my mom birth certificate, S-C-O-T-T, okay? I'm a child of the late 70s. Scott was like everybody's name, okay? And then in sixth grade, who's in my class? Scott Wilson, Scott Woodruff. I was like, no, I'm done. That's it, right? I've hit my tipping point. I said, I'm going to spell it S-K-O-T, and I'll never have to put my last name on anything ever again. And lo and behold, I never had to put my last name on anything ever again. I became the artsy fartsy kid. I was doing music and design and photography and all kinds of stuff. Went to graphic design school, and it kind of stuck and it just stayed. I created a brand for myself in sixth grade and it just kind of stuck. So that's it. Super deep, right?
I love it. What's your mom call you now?
Scotty, with S-C-O-T-T-I-E.
So she's the one in the world that's allowed to do that these days.
She's not changing. It's never going to change.
I understand that. So yeah, you mentioned brand. Brand's really critical, and name's a key component of obviously our personal brand. I love what you wrote on the site. I'd love to kind of hear a little bit about your thinking behind it. You said your brand is your soul. That's the thing that gives you substance. At the end of the day, it's what makes both customers and employees stay loyal to you. That's a pretty big aspirational comment. Is brand really that big of a deal?
Yeah. And I would be willing to argue it's worth billions and billions of dollars. Just ask any of the giant companies out there, right? How important their brand is to them as an organization internally, and to them as an organization externally with their customers, clients, internally really with their employees, teams, and other people inside that organization. So it's a huge deal. And I talk about it a lot because I come from that world of external communication, marketing, graphic design. I owned a design agency for 11 years. I worked at a design agency for almost 8 years up in Chicago. So I was very versed in that external communication standpoint. So brand is a huge thing. Developing brands for companies, as we did for almost 2 decades, we grew to understand. I grew to understand really what brand was all about and how important it really was.
I've had some people on the podcast before, a couple of times, where we talked about personal brand a little bit. And I think it's always interesting to revisit the idea of people will be like, well, Nike has a brand or Disney has a brand. And you mentioned the billion word. I mean, there's certainly $1 billion brands, multi-billion dollar brands. But what does it mean like to say I have a personal brand or I have my brand? And you mentioned like the SKOT changing of the name back in 6th grade kind of set a trajectory in a way that you continue to buy in and build on that caused you to create your brand. What is it, the essence of like my brand as a person?
Okay. Can I ask you what your interpretation or definition of I'm putting you on the spot here, yeah, Patrick. So what your definition of the word brand would be, or how would you describe it?
Well, I think brand is essentially a promise. So when people think about the brand of a company, they think about what's the promise that company is going to deliver upon, and their ability to deliver on that promise oftentimes equals to their brand.
Okay. So I love that. I define it a little bit different, but it's in essence a little bit of what you said, right? So when you take that, let's take your definition, say it's a promise of something that you're going to deliver as a result of somebody making a transaction. Okay. So, and we talk about that from an external standpoint a lot, whether I buy a pair of shoes from Nike, or whether I buy a widget off of Amazon, or whether I go to, down the street to my local pizza shop and buy a pizza, from whatever that is. So that's from a corporate standpoint. Let's talk about the personal brand standpoint. How would you interpret that from the personal side then?
Well, I think the personal side of a brand often kind of comes down to a few things. It might be a little bit about your capabilities as an individual, what it's like to work with you as an individual, the results that you've delivered over time. Kind of the culmination of those things often speaks to your personal brand.
Right on. All right. So now that I've interviewed you for your show, I'll go ahead and throw in my 2 cents. So brand is simply this: what people say about you when you're not around. It's your reputation, right? And the way you deliver on that promise, as you said, is going to affect that reputation. It's going to have an impact on what people say about you when you're not around. So we'll take from the external standpoint, my interaction when I go to the Nike store and I have an interaction with that employee inside of that store, the music, the atmosphere that's created, the customer service that I get, the transactional process of purchasing the shoes, putting on the shoes, the actual product itself, using them in my next sporting event or walking around or whatever. Every single one of those things is a brand touch point. I am being impacted. Nike's brand, the way I think about them, is being impacted. Because now what's going to happen when I go to the next barbecue and my friends are like, oh, nice shoes. And I'll be like, thanks. These are super comfortable. I've had them on for weeks now and I won't take them off. The store experience was super cool. The store when it was awesome. They had this big poster of whatever, right? And the rep was really cool. Like, right. So we tend to go off on these experiences we have just because sometimes they surprise us. That is all a brand thing. It has nothing to do with Nike's logo, has nothing to do with Nike's color palette, has nothing to do with their typeface that they use for their packaging. It's all about that reputation. Now, let's flip this, okay? We're going to flip this to the personal side. You as a leader, the interactions I have with you in that one-on-one meeting, in that break room, in that group meeting that we have, right? In our first interview when I'm coming on board, every single touch point I have with you is making a deposit into that brand account or a withdrawal. I'm either going to start to go, this person's really getting me. Like we're starting to gel. Like, this is really cool. And then you're going to go to that barbecue, same barbecue where somebody complimented your shoes. And they're going to say, oh, I heard you just got a new gig. Yes. And I've got to tell you about my boss. Like, this guy is super cool. Like, he's really interested in me. We had this meeting last week where he was talking to me. I'm brand new, but he was asking me about my opinion. And he was really like, all of those things are a brand impression, right? A reflection of that boss's brand, that personal brand. Okay. And at the end of the day, we're really concerned with our self-image and what people say about us. But yet we do a ton of things that undermine that influence and that brand impression every day.
Yeah, I do an exercise sometimes with my students, actually, when we're talking a little bit about their brand or how people see them or their reputation, where I'll ask them to think about descriptors that they'll use. Like, how would you describe the results you deliver? Are they short term? Are they long standing? Are they, critical results? Are they, whatever you say. I also ask about like expectations of experience. What do you think people would think it would be like to work with you? Or how would people who have worked with you describe you? And inevitably, when people go through that exercise, some people think, oh yes, people would write down that I'm exhausting to work with sometimes, or draining, and other people might say, that I'm a catalyst for ideas, or whatever it might be. But inevitably, if you, and it's hard to peel that onion back and really think how people really will see you. I mean, you can ask them, but they may not even tell you the truth, and that's a whole conversation for another day. But at the end of the day, let's just say, for example, that what I perceive to be the brand that I have for myself is a gap between what I want the brand to be for myself. All right. And it's a gap that's big enough for me to want to take some action. So I'm listening to this podcast right now, hearing Scott talk about this and going, maybe how people would describe me is kind of not the reputation I want to have. Where do I start? What do I do?
Okay. So I coined this. I don't coin this. I didn't coin this phrase, leadership brand, right? What is your leadership brand? Is really the question I want you to be asking. And taking into account. So I love your exercise, and this is something else you can do to kind of, as another twist on that is, hey, what 5 words would you use to describe yourself? 1 word. What 5 words would you just use to describe your brand? Okay. And have people just think of those 5 words. Then what I'm going to have you do is ask them to ask 5 other people, and they could do this in a Google form, so it's anonymous, right? Send it out to 5 people, or a text message if they don't want it anonymous, right? Understand that there's going to be a bias there in a little bit, but say, hey, what 5 words would you use to describe me? And have them give. So they've got 25 plus their 5. They've got 25 words plus their 5. And then they're going to categorize these things, right? So then they're going to start to see patterns. They're going to start, I use this with companies. I use this with personal brands. I use this with leaders. What are we seeing here? Oh, people tend to think of me as trustworthy. That's interesting, right? You're going to start to see words or ideas repeated. And those are the things that we want to see. We want to see trends, right? So that's what's going to start to paint a picture of what is our perception versus outside perception, because our perception is not always what the outside perception is, right? It's called self-awareness. And how many of us are masters in self-awareness? Not a lot of us, okay? And so that's going to be really, really important to do. So as we grow, I hope that we can understand what that how that happens and how that shapes outside perspective and helps us get some insight on what we need to do. Now, where do we start? Okay. So first it's self-analysis, just like what you're doing, right? With your students. Hey, think about this tip, think about that tip, and let's get some insights. And then let's analyze that. And then let's think about, hey, where are some potential areas where we need some help? And there's a couple of different tools I have to help people do that. And one of them is called the influence model. And when I teach this, I teach about a principle called the 4 C's. The 4 C's are character, chemistry, competency, credibility. Character, chemistry, competency, credibility. Those are the 4 things you need to just build trust with somebody first. Our ultimate goal is to build influence, right? As a personal brand, as a leader, as a parent, as a brother, a sister, somebody in the community, we want influence. Because that's when we can shape, and that's when we can, have a I'm for you conversation. And so those 4 C's are really important just to gain. So some of us are really, really good at character and chemistry. We're just feelers. We're people, so good at that all day. People are like, I like you and I can trust you. You're a good person. Now, some of us are really good at competency and credibility. Okay. People may not like us, but they know that we can get the job done, right? They know we can get it done. They know we're good at our job. They have full confidence we can crush it. So that's the competency credibility side. Now, the problem is there aren't very many of us that are good at all 4. So we have to be really intentional about building that other thing. So when you get your 30 words, okay, this goes back to our brand word exercise. When you get your 30 words, I want you to put in 4 columns: character, chemistry, competency, credibility. And then I want you to start, it's a bit subjective. I want you to start putting those words in each column, all 30 of them. Start putting them in a different, and what column that you're going to start to see some columns emerge. You're going to see the competency credibility side heavier than the character chemistry, or it's going to be reversed. So you're going to look at that and go, people tend to value me as my character chemistry side. That's cool. I also need to pay attention then probably to this chemistry and competence. I mean, the credibility competency side. Maybe put some effort into that, and see what that's all about. Maybe people don't think I'm not that, but that I could work. So I think it's all about self-awareness, understanding, and some real reflection about what we can do to build on those 4 C's. Because I'm sorry I'm talking so much, but this last point, it's making you have to talk less. What am I doing? Taking your job, Patrick.
Keep going, baby.
Here's the thing. So out of those 4 C's, I can look at them and I can look at my other relationships and go, I'm having a real hard time with that person. Do they have good character? Yeah. I mean, yeah, probably. Chemistry? Yeah, we jive. Like, we can shoot the breeze. We can go to lunch and hang, and we have symmetry and synergy, in our job. Are they competent? Probably not. Like, they're probably not very good at their job. Credibility? Probably not, because I don't really think they're that competent. So then I sit there and go, oh, okay, that's the problem. That's why they don't have influence with me. So why don't I have influence with others? Why can't I get this team moving? Is there something with me that's happening that I can't get this team moving? And then you can analyze those 4 C's. So that's a quick tip I use.
No, I appreciate it. As I'm thinking about doing the exercise myself, or maybe listeners are as well, I'm thinking, all right, so I send it out to a handful of people. Do I go for my fans? Do I go for my critics? Who do I go for in that list of 5? Because if people listening, if they don't think they have critics, A, they're probably wrong, and B, send me an email. I'll share a few of mine. I got plenty. You got to have some critics in life too, because that means you're doing some things.
Patrick, I don't believe you have any critics, man.
We're not done yet. We're not done yet, Scott. You got about 10 more minutes.
Okay, all right.
I'll flip you.
All right. Okay, cool. So what I would say is I want you to send it to people that are going to be honest. I don't care if they're critics. I don't care if they're fans. I want honesty, because when and you need to put on your body armor as well. Okay. You got to go into this not being defensive, lower your wall of self-preservation. Okay. This is a building exercise. Be drop that pride, be secure, be confident, be humble, and ask for people that are going to be honest with you and tell them, hey, and that's why I say do it in the Google form, or if you have another Survey Monkey or something like that, that's anonymous. You can just send a link out, say, hey, this is totally anonymous. I cannot track this back to you. I love brute honesty. Please be brutal with me. Tell me where I shine. Tell me if you don't think that there's some things I'm not great at. Let me know. I'd love to know.
You know, Scott, as we're talking, I'm just thinking about your career, and I have an interesting conversation going on right now with somebody who understands brand, understands marketing, but also has his feet, clearly standing firmly in the HR world. How'd you go from marketing to HR, or is that the transition you made? Because you're talking both the brand side and kind of the mechanics of it, but also you really get the people side of things too.
Doesn't everybody make that transition? Isn't that net? No,
not necessarily. Although there's a lot of people from marketing that eventually get to the top of like consumer brand companies and things, right? I mean, it's a great trajectory path.
And they end up doing it. For years, right? Working with companies and being the external communicator, right? Taking these ideas from internal teams and then putting them in, packaging them, crafting messages, designing collateral, creating something that resonated with an external audience. So we had to understand the audience. We had to understand what the company was all about. We had to understand the mission, vision, values. We had to understand the product. And in order to understand those things, we had to ask a lot of questions, understand, and then trial and error. And then we would execute and communicate to the external world. And hopefully they would buy that product or that service or that idea that we were selling. And in my career, I started to think there's a lot of dysfunction happening inside of teams, right? We are wasting a ton of time. We are wasting a ton of money because internal teams were so inconsistent and so misaligned, didn't communicate effectively, that there was turnover. So we had new clients all the time because they're like, this person would leave and then that person would come on, or we would just get let go from the whole job because a new person would come in, a new VP of marketing, new vice president of marketing comes in and says, hey, I've got my own people. We don't need you anymore. And I'm like, what is going on? Like this definitely has an effect on the external world. It starts on the inside. And what I found is that on the outside, I didn't have a lot of control over what was happening on the inside. So now I've said, what if I take all of my understanding of brand strategy, design, external communication, and I bring that to the internal and I say, how can I help you develop your internal brand? The way employees talk about you when they go to that barbecue, the way bosses talk about you as employees, the way you talk about your boss, the way you talk about the team, the way you talk about the organization. How can I shape that perception? How can I create healthy teams, healthy cultures inside companies? Therefore, there's more alignment, healthier relationships, better communication, better execution, and they can create amazing external marketing and communication programs. And then take that with them wherever they go. Multiply that health and that leadership, that knowledge to them and to the rest of the organization. They leave, they take it to the other organization with them, right? They take it home to their families. And that was the real impact that helped me shift over into more of that HR side.
That makes perfect sense. As I'm interviewing people, I oftentimes am jotting words down. I've jotted a lot down as we're going through our conversation today. I'm learning a lot. I hope listeners are as well. But there were certain words that jumped out when I looked back through my list of things I jotted down: marketing, brand, reputation, communication, execution, and then these words that I kind of circled: teams, trust, leaders, and culture. How can teams and leaders build a trustworthy culture?
So I think it's all about focusing on those 4 C's, right? When you're selling a product, you want the transaction. When you're selling an idea, when you're selling anything, you want that transaction. We need to build trust first. I don't think any salesperson out there on the planet will say that trust is not a piece of, the buying process, the selling process. And as leaders, we're selling ourselves, right? Every day as employees, we are selling ourselves every day to try to build more, to gain trust from that individual so that I can then hopefully go into the influence space. So I think it's starting out with those 4 C's, I think is critical. Part of communication is listening. And I know a lot of people talk about that, right? Conduct a listening audit. Understand what it takes and how good you are at truly listening to the people across the table from you. How good are you at showing healthy body language? It shows you're interested and focused. How good are you at summarizing what you just heard? How good are you at asking clarifying questions when you don't understand things? How good are you at resisting the temptation to jump in when you assume you already know what they're talking about? Okay. There's a lot of those things that, you can take a listening audit on and say, I'm pretty good at those things. I'm not so good. Then ask somebody else, hey, how good am I? Do you think I am at this? So in asking those questions, I'm also building influence, because now that person goes, they're asking me. They really want to know. They're working on themselves. That's cool. I can see them making an effort instead of just bulldozing conversations and trampling all over me. So it's all about that, building that trust, building that influence in a way that's healthy, productive, and helps people feel valued.
I've heard other people on the podcast say that leadership boils down to decision making and influence. And we've spent a sizable amount of time talking about influence today, which I do think is really a critical component for leadership. I'm curious, as you think back to your marketing days, as well as your current work you're doing these days around brands and internal brands with organizations, when you think about that, how important is it, that last piece you were talking about really listening what people are saying and the ability to ask good questions? Let me expand on that just for a second, because now I'm violating my own rule by asking more than one question, but that's okay. So the ability to, put a question out there and not feel like you have to fill the dead space, or the ability to kind of be very simple in what you're asking and allow people to kind of explore it in their own answers. How critical are those type of things?
Well, I would like you to think about your answer too, because I want to hear what you have to say about this too, because I think it's an interesting question. I think that there's going to be many of us have a tendency to hate dead space, right? Hate that emptiness. It makes us uncomfortable, and sometimes we will back away from it, just say, "Oh no, don't worry about it," right? Like just forget that. We can just move on to the next thing, because we don't want people to feel uncomfortable, right? We don't want to make them think that we're trying to trip them up or something happening, right? But I think as it all goes back to this phrase of, do they believe I am for them? Okay, that's the question. Do they believe I'm there for their highest possible good? I'm fighting for them. Or do they believe I'm for myself, or I'm against them? If they believe I'm against them, or that I'm only for myself, that conversation's not going to go well anyway, right? As long as they feel I'm for them, and I ask them the uncomfortable questions, or I approach them with something and just leave the space to hang, and they feel a little uncomfortable, it's going to be all right, because they know that I'm doing it for a purpose, and that's to build them up or to build some kind of rapport with them at the end of the day. So I know a lot of people say, sit in the silence, sit in the discomfort, let it ruminate a little bit. It's hard for me, right, to do that, but I feel like I constantly have to fill the space with something, right? And so I think it's really important, because then it gives us a chance to listen, right? Even when there's no talking, we're listening to our own thoughts, we're listening to our own ideas about what we just said, right? And trying to really engage with what's going to come back at us. So I don't know if that even answers your question, and but what are your thoughts about that?
Well, no, it does answer the question. It's actually interesting too how you kind of gave your own internal hesitation. Some things that you go through it processing in your own mind while that dead space of air is out there in the moment, thinking, should I jump in? Should I fill it? I mean, I get that. I go through that myself as well, and a lot of listeners probably do. When you first asked me when you first said you're going to pose a question back to me, I immediately jotted something down, which is what somebody taught me early on in teaching or facilitating things. And I try to bring it into the classroom today. We sometimes get so focused on like, do I look right? Am I carrying myself right? Do people see, how are they judging me in the moment type of thing? And then eventually, if we stick to something long enough, we kind of get past that a little bit, and then we get into, do I know my stuff? Do I know the content I'm teaching right now? And if we feel comfortable in that, then we finally get to the fact that, oh yeah, there's other people in the room. I'm actually trying to teach them something. So what I've learned over time is the faster I can get past these first two hurdles, and not be worrying about how I look in the moment, or am I wearing the right sport coat, or does it look like I dug it out of the back of my closet? Are the students like judging me in that moment? Or do I know my content? I'll put in the time to learn my content, but I got to get past that stuff and remember that I'm there to teach students, which in my mind, when you were talking just now and I had jotted back those other notes and I looked at those, it gets back to, I think both answers, intent really matters. What's your intentions here? Is your intentions to fill that dead space, to show people? Maybe I looked at the 4 C's, character, chemistry, competence, and credibility. I'm thinking I'm lacking in credibility. So darn it, I'm going to get back in the next meeting and prove that I know everything. And the fact is, by opening my mouth right away and not closing it for a while, I'm actually destroying my credibility, which is a really interesting dynamic. Yeah, it's
so true.
Yeah.
There's something that you just said is really profound, right? And it goes
finally 30 minutes in, I got one.
Like I said, brilliance. It's in there, man. I just got to dig it out.
That's right.
The gold's in there, right? It's just got to mine it out. Here's the principle. So the second part, thanks for leading me into this beautifully. I didn't even set you up with that question, so well done. The influence model. Okay, I only spoke about the 4 C's because that's where we started to build trust. The thing is, on the other side of that transaction, once we have trust in the transaction, the bad side of that is sometimes we think that we're good. We got the transaction. Oh, thank you. I got it. I'm good. And then we revert back. And then we think that that's it. And then we move on to the next thing. That's not where true influence is built. True influence is built on the other side of what we call self-preservation. So we've got the 4 C's on one side of the self-preservation with us. And then we've got somebody on the other side that we're trying to build influence with. And they've got their wall of self-preservation up. So here are the 3 questions you have to ask yourself in order to lower those walls of self-preservation. What am I trying to hide? What am I afraid of losing? And what am I trying to prove? So if I'm on my wall of self-preservation and I'm trying to build my 4 C's, okay, I have to look and ask myself those questions to lower my wall of self-preservation, or else I'm going to keep it up and just do the transaction, be happy with it and go because, I got it. They didn't see that I'm actually not truly certified in that thing, or that that product isn't that great, but I got it through the door. I've got the transaction. I'm gone. So now, if I'm trying to hide something, if I'm trying to prove something, if I'm afraid of losing something, my commission, right? All right. Or if I'm trying to lose this idea, I'm afraid of losing this idea to somebody else in the room, my wall's going to be up. I got the transaction. I'm out. Instead, I've got to ask myself, do I have nothing to fear, nothing to hide, and nothing to prove? And that wall's going to come down. Now, the problem is I can't control the other person. The other person's got their wall up for whatever reason. They're asking themselves the same question. You can ask yourself, I wonder what it is. Why can't I make progress with that person? Why can't I have influence with that person? What's preventing me from doing that? Do they have something to fear? Do they have something to hide? Are they trying to prove something? And analyze that situation and go, they are trying really, really hard. They're afraid of something. Something is in there, or they're trying to hide something, or they're trying to prove something. They're trying way too hard. And like you said, what happens when we try to overprove something? We end up shooting ourselves in the foot, becomes a self-fulfilled prophecy, and we end up undermining our influence, just like you said, right? I'm trying to prove something. People are like, dude, chill. Like, can you believe Scott? Like, that guy needs to chill out, right? Like he is working way too hard. I'm going to get somebody else in here that doesn't seem as desperate, you know? So I think that what you said transitions really great into that second half of that influence model, where it is about self-preservation. It is about what can I do to really build influence after I've built the trust?
You know, as I'm thinking about that fear and what am I trying to hide, what am I trying to prove type of moment, I would imagine that there's a degree of, if I do a good self-analysis and I say, well, I am kind of trying to hide a few things. Maybe I'm trying to prove something right now to Scott as I'm going through this. Maybe I'm fearful about a couple things. But earlier you said the word synergy. Well, I'm not going to get to synergy by any, like you just said, I'm not going to get to synergy. I'm just going to get what I want and get out in the moment. So I feel like I wasn't caught or revealed or whatever it might be. So how important is the ability to be a little bit leaning into reciprocity? And then I could say, you know, Scott, there's a couple things I'm a little bit fearful about here, and I might lay one out, and that makes it a little okay for you to share something back with me.
Amen. So when I coach individuals, leaders of teams, leaders of organizations, employees even, we walk through this together. And one of the most humbling questions and vulnerable questions is, what am I trying to hide? Okay. People, when you say, what am I afraid of? That can be pretty vulnerable as well. It's like, well, I'm afraid of losing my job. I'm afraid of looking incompetent. I'm afraid of maybe missing expectations or letting people down, right? So people can usually be pretty open about those. When you're trying to hide something, that speaks like, that almost like jeopardizes people's character at times, right? Mm-hmm. So that it's really like, as a coach, how do I build that influence to allow them to be vulnerable enough to say, oh my gosh, I am trying to hide the fact that this happened to me when I was young, and that's influencing how I act now. And right, going into that thought. Now, what I encourage them to do is, hey, Mr. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so, I'm not telling you to go spill all your laundry all over the place with this particular person you're trying to build influence with. But as soon as they see you as somebody who has nothing to fear, nothing to hide, and nothing to prove, meaning you're being vulnerable in that situation, in that conversation, they will sit there, like I said earlier, and say, that's cool that they opened up to me about that. And even if they don't open back up, that's still a tiny bit of deposit into that brand account that I was talking about earlier. They're going to start to walk away and think, if not say something to somebody and go, wow, like Scott just opened up to me in that last meeting, which is kind of interesting. I gained some respect, right?
I wasn't really willing to dance with him on that at this moment until no. But at least I appreciate his performance in that moment.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So, you know, and then some people, they may need time to like process it. And then they'll come back to you maybe the next day, the next week, the next month, and say, hey, and it's going to make an impression, right? A brand impression, right? Which is, remember that meeting we had about a month ago and you came to me with this thing? I really appreciated that. And I kind of wanted to talk to you about where I'm going, right? Like, it maybe they need a long runway, but I think as a leader and your expectations and that, are they willing to reciprocate? Okay, I'm going to go in, I'm going to lay out what I'm trying to hide or what I'm afraid of as a leader. Okay. That's not, we don't want to undermine our own influence, right, with what we say, but being careful and strategic about the things we say. Having your expectations met is going to be a big deal, right? So if you're expecting direct reciprocation and they don't give it, how are you going to handle that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's where the idea of time is such a critical component to this.
Yeah.
Right? And whether it's in the classroom for me, where I'll ask a question and if somebody doesn't answer right away, sometimes you think, oh, they're not paying attention, so therefore I'll call on somebody, or therefore I'll do something else. And the reality is sometimes they're just processing. And just like you said right there, you can hear something with someone and they might just not reciprocate, which is totally fine because maybe they're processing it, or maybe it's going to come out in a different way, or 2 weeks later in a meeting. So I think that part of it might be the idea then, when I got back to the question about, well, what if I share something, then maybe they'll reciprocate. I think the key part there might be share something. Yes, they might reciprocate, but share it not with the intention that they're going to reciprocate. Share it with the intention of revealing a little bit more about who you are.
Because then it is I'm for you. I'm only doing this because I'm invested in your growth. And I feel this is going to help you. Right. But I need to understand how that's going to help you. Mm-hmm. Right. If I'm going into it saying, okay, I'm going to share this with Patrick, and I hope that he shares something back. I expect him to share something back because I know that's the only way I can help him is if he shares something back with me. And you don't. Am I going to walk out of that thinking he's just a closed book? I can't make any progress with Patrick. And then you start abdicating. Do I start abdicating with you in my leadership? Because at that point, you're not willing to share. I can't make any headway with you. So I just check out and then just let you fall by the wayside. Therefore, you fall into what we call the pit of despair, right? You feel it. Everybody else is down there in the pit of despair with you because I've abdicated other people in the past that didn't meet my expectations. And now everybody just wallows in the pit of despair. And I wonder why nothing's getting done as a leader.
Okay, Scott, we can't end the podcast with me wallowing in the pit of despair. So
okay, Patrick,
what do you do? How do you throw me a rope? Get me out of the pit of despair. What do I do?
So here's what people need. And you said it. Number one was time. People need time. They need time to process. They need time to adapt. They need time to learn. They need time with you, both informal and formal time. Informal time, hey, let's go to lunch and we're not going to talk about work. Like, let's just shoot the breeze. How's your family doing? How was last weekend, right? Formal time, we have stand-up one-on-ones, weekly, whatever it is, okay? Formal and informal time. They need vision. They need an understanding of where they're going. How do they fit into the overall vision of the company and their goal as an employee, your goal as a team lead or a leader? They need vision. They need to understand what they're part of, okay? And they need encouragement. And I'm not talking about generic encouragement or acknowledgement, like, hey, Patrick, good job in that last meeting, and then I leave, right? It's, hey, Patrick, I really love that point you made about such and such and such and such. Very cool. I would love to see more of that in the future. Because then I go, they're listening to me, okay? They are invested in me. They do want me to make progress. I do see my place in this company. I don't feel pressured. I do feel like I have time to do what I need to do. And at times I'm not saying to just like hope and pray that Patrick comes back to me one day. I'm going to do all this stuff and just hope. It's okay. After a little while, hey, I've noticed something with you. I'd really love to talk to you about it. I shared something with you a couple weeks ago or a month ago. How would you think about that? Kind of like see if you can get it, like dig a little bit. Okay. It's okay to push and challenge. Don't make people hate you from doing it. Don't be like overly persistent to where you're like strapping them down in an interrogation chamber, but like, dig a little bit, give them the opportunity to really see what you believe in when it comes to them.
Well, Scott, I want to encourage listeners, if they're thinking like, I want to work on my brand a little bit, the brand of my team, work on our culture a little bit, maybe understand as a leader and get some coaching around how to give people time and cast a vision and make sure I seek understanding and encouragement, those critical components. I'm going to encourage them to give you a look, because I think they'll really benefit. I really benefited from the conversation today. I'll put down in the details the website they can find you at, because I think if they just go to Scott W., they might actually get like one of your third grade classmates because they'll spell it wrong. So
dang, Scott Woodruff and Scott Wilson every time.
Yeah, they're killing it. Every time you go on a podcast, their business goes up. We don't want to do that. So yeah, I'll put it down in there. Remember, it's SKOT, folks, so you can find Scott. Scott, thanks so much for joining me, man. I really appreciate it.
Patrick, you're a rock star. I appreciate
it. Coming from you, that means a lot. Thanks. Well, folks, that's all I have for today's episode. My thanks to Scott Waldron for joining me in the Leadership Lab to talk about his insights to help you and your organization to be more effective and have a bigger impact on the world. In addition to listening to the podcast, I hope you consider, again, checking out my book, The 5-Week Leadership Challenge. Just go to the website 5weekleadershipchallenge.com, and there's all the information about the book and how you can go about ordering it online or in stores. Again, thanks for joining me today. My name's Dr. Patrick Ledden. Now go make it a great day.